Here's something nobody is telling you about the fuel crisis. The price spike at the pump is actually the smallest part of the problem. The real damage, the part that could cost the average American family over $4,000 in the next 18 months, has nothing to do with what you pay to fill your tank. I'm going to show you exactly where that money is going to disappear from, why almost nobody is talking about it, and the 5 moves you can make this week to make sure you're not one of the people who gets blindsided. But first, do you know what the Strait of Hormuz actually is? Because if you don't, you're flying blind right now. And after this video, you won't be. My name is Daniel, and I spend way too much time thinking about how energy prices silently destroy people's personal finances. If you're someone who feels like your paycheck is shrinking, even though your salary hasn't changed, and you can't quite figure out where the money is going, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Because what's happening at the pump right now is not random. It's not just gas is expensive again. There is a very specific set of events driving this. And understanding them is the difference between reacting emotionally and making smart financial decisions. Let's get into it. Okay, so here's the thing. Most people have a vague sense that something happened in the Middle East and gas went up. But I want you to understand the actual mechanics here, because the scale of this is genuinely shocking. On February 28th, 2026, the United States launched military strikes on Iran. Iran's response was immediate and devastating to global energy markets. They effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you might be thinking, okay, some shipping lane got blocked. Big deal. No, this is a very big deal. The Strait of Hormuz is the single most important choke point in the global energy system. Roughly 20% of the world's entire oil and gas supply passes through that narrow channel. When Iran shut it down, countries that rely on that waterway, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, collectively had to shut in 7.5 million barrels per day of crude oil production in March alone. That number is expected to rise to 9.1 million barrels per day in April. To put that in perspective, the entire United States produces about 13 million barrels a day. We just lost the equivalent of 2/3 of US production overnight from global supply. Let that sit for a second. And the price reaction was instant. Brent crude, which was sitting around $70 a barrel coming into 2026, skyrocketed more than 30% in less than a month, hitting $102 per barrel by mid-March. Brent briefly touched $117.27, reflecting just how fragile the market had become. At the pump, the EIA projects the annual average gasoline price for 2026 will come in around $3.34 per gallon. But that average is being dragged up by prices that, right now in April, are approaching $4.30 per gallon as a monthly average. And diesel is forecast to peak above $5.80 per gallon. That is a lot. Let me show you a number that stopped me cold when I calculated it. And I want you to think about this not as a math problem, but as money that used to be in your account and now isn't. The average American burns about 535 gallons of fuel per year. That's your baseline. Now, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Quick question, and I want you to actually think about this before I give you the numbers. How much do you think you spent on fuel last month? Don't look it up yet. Just guess. Got a number? Good. Now, here's what the math actually says. At $3 a gallon, where we were before all this, that's $1,605 a year at the pump. Fine. Manageable. At $4.30 a gallon, that's $2,300 a year. A difference of almost $700 annually. Or call it $58 extra per month. Now you might be thinking, Daniel, $58 a month isn't going to break me. And you're right, in isolation. But here's what most people don't realize. That $58 a month, compounded over time, is actually a massive number. If instead of spending that $58 extra at the pump, you'd invested it at an 8% annual return, a reasonable long-run stock market average. Over 10 years, that's over $10,600 that never made it into your wealth. Over 20 years, that $58 a month in extra fuel costs becomes nearly $34,000 in lost wealth. That's not a rounding error. That's a car. That's a down payment. That's a decade of retirement contributions. Gone. Not because of one bad decision, but because of a slow, invisible drain you stopped noticing after week 2. And that's just your direct fuel cost. We haven't even talked about what fuel prices do to everything else in your life. This is where it gets really interesting and a little uncomfortable. Look, every single product you buy at a grocery store was delivered by a diesel truck. Diesel prices have risen nearly 50% since the conflict began. And economists estimate that a 10% rise in diesel alone can push up the broader consumer price index. When diesel moves 50%, the ripple effects touch everything. And here's the one that really keeps analysts up at night. Jet fuel in North America has spiked 95% since the war began. Not 10%, 95%. Airlines are already raising baggage fees. USPS, Amazon, and FedEx have added fuel surcharges. If you haven't driven a single mile this month, you are still paying for this crisis every time you open your front door. And here's the part that hits differently. The Strait of Hormuz handles over 30% of global urea exports, the fertilizer farmers use to grow corn, wheat, and other staple crops. When that supply gets disrupted, the cost of growing food goes up. That doesn't show up in your grocery bill this week. It shows up 4 to 6 months from now when the harvest hits and farmers have already locked in their input costs. The UK's Food Policy Institute has already warned of long-term food price increases as a direct result. So the pain at the pump is the headline. The pain in your grocery cart over the next 12 to 18 months. That's the story most people haven't figured out yet. Okay, this is the part of the video that made me genuinely angry when I dug into the research, because there is a massive gap between what US officials are saying publicly and what their own data shows privately. And that gap is going to cost a lot of people real money. Here's the quote that should make you close this video and open your bank app right now. Energy Secretary Chris Wright on NBC. Americans will feel it for a few more weeks. His own department's forecast: prices stay above $3 a gallon through the end of 2027. That's not a small discrepancy. That is a year and a half. Betting markets put only a 27% chance on a ceasefire by end of April. And as recently as April 13th, the U.S. Central Command announced it would begin enforcing a maritime blockade on all vessels entering and leaving Iranian ports, a move that sent gasoline futures jumping more than 4% in a single session. The EIA's base case assumes the conflict doesn't persist past April and that Strait traffic gradually resumes. Under that scenario, Brent crude peaks around $115 per barrel in Q2 2026, then eases, falling below $90 by Q4 2026. But even in that optimistic scenario, the EIA doesn't foresee prices falling below $3 a gallon through the end of 2027. There's a phrase that perfectly captures why this matters. USC supply chain professor Michael Misch put it this way: prices go up like rockets, and they come down like a feather. That gap between what officials say and what the data shows is exactly where most people get financially blindsided. They hold on. They wait for prices to drop back to where they were, and they make zero adjustments in the meantime. Let me be real with you for a second, because this is the part I actually care most about. High fuel prices do something predictable to people's financial behavior, and almost all of it is bad. They panic. They make reactive decisions. They trade in perfectly good cars on impulse. They pull money out of investment accounts to cover monthly cash flow shortfalls. They rack up credit card debt to keep their lifestyle intact and tell themselves they'll pay it back when prices drop. And then when prices do eventually come down, like a feather, remember, the discipline disappears. The emergency is over. The money doesn't go back into savings. They just exhale and spend. The people who come out ahead in moments like this are the ones who treat a price spike as a planning signal, not an emergency. The spike is the alarm going off. The question is what you do when the alarm sounds. Now look, I've just thrown a lot of bad news at you, and I know how this goes. You watch a video like this, you feel informed, maybe a little anxious, and then you close the tab and change nothing. I've done it too. Most people do. But here's the difference between the people who come out of this crisis ahead and the people who don't. It's not intelligence, and it's not income. It's 5 specific decisions made in the next 7 days. And I'm going to walk you through each one right now. starting with the one that takes literally 3 minutes and could save you the most money. 1. Make the number real. Go look at your bank statements right now. Add up your gas and diesel spending in March compared to January. Write it down. Knowing you spent $70 more last month is very different from vaguely feeling like fuel is expensive. You cannot fix a number you haven't faced. 2. Build or protect your cash buffer. If you don't have 1 to 2 months of expenses sitting in a high-yield savings account, that is your number one financial priority right now. Fuel hits first. Then groceries. Then your insurance renewal. Inflation stress tests every weak link in your budget simultaneously. A buffer buys you time to respond rather than react. 3. Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary prices. If you're thinking about panic buying an EV right now, or trading in your car because you can't emotionally handle the pump anymore, run the full math first. Total cost of ownership, financing costs, insurance changes. The decision might still make sense, but make it rationally, not emotionally. 4. Get ahead of grocery inflation before it hits. Staple goods, rice, canned goods, cooking oil, protein are going to cost more in a few months as fuel costs work their way through the supply chain. If you have the budget to stock up on non-perishables now, that is a legitimate financial hedge. 5. And this is the one most financial advisors would actually argue with me on. Do not pause your investing. I know that feels backwards when your monthly expenses just jumped $58. But here's the thing. The people who paused their 401k contributions during the 2022 energy spike and then restarted when things calmed down, they missed a 26% market recovery in 2023. The math on staying invested through a $58 a month fuel increase is not even close. Trim subscriptions, cut discretionary spending, but protect the investing habit first. Look, nobody signed up for this. Nobody built a budget assuming a Middle East conflict was going to spike their fuel bill by 50% in 6 weeks. This situation is genuinely hard, and it's okay to acknowledge that. But here's the thing. The people who look back on 2026 as the year that set them back financially, and the people who look back on it as the year they finally got serious about their money, they're living through the exact same price spike right now. The difference isn't luck, it isn't income. It's whether they treated this moment as information to act on or just as suffering to endure. The prices will come down. Slowly, like a feather, but they will come down. The question is whether the habits you build in the hard months are still in place when the easy months return. If this video helped you make sense of what's happening, smash that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this content. Subscribe if you want more of this, and drop a comment. What's the biggest financial pressure you're feeling from rising fuel costs right now? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.